Welcome to today's episode of Buildings Hub Live, where we spotlight the changemakers and technologies leading the charge to electrify our built environment. On our podcast, we tackle the issues facing building decarbonization, from space heating to water heaters to electric cooking and beyond. In this episode, we'll chat with Marnese Jackson, Executive Director of the Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition, and Michael Stoddard, Executive Director of Efficiency Maine. What do we need to consider when electrifying buildings in cold climates? How do we overcome technology challenges at consistently low temperatures? What can we learn from the policy successes that we've seen so far? Stay tuned to find out. Here's your host, Atlas Public Policy Analyst, Stephen Naimol.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 14th episode of Buildings Hub Live. My name is Stephen Naimoli, Policy Analyst at Atlas Public Policy, and I have the honor of being your host today. For today's episode, we'll discuss electrifying buildings in cold climates. What specific opportunities and challenges does a cold climate pose for electrification? And how are states working to deliver energy and carbon savings for building owners? Stay with us to find out. But before we jump into our discussion today, a quick note on Buildings Hub. Here at Atlas, we manage a one-stop shop data analysis tool for building sector electrification called Buildings Hub. If you're interested in heat pump market data, state building policies and funding programs, the current makeup of the U.S. housing stock, federal grants, and crisply designed dashboards, we've got you covered. We recently posted a new data story on the latest heat pump sales data. We encourage you to register for our platform and check out our data features. We'd love to have you join the Buildings Hub community. As for this episode, we're currently live on YouTube and LinkedIn. We encourage our audience to send us your questions via the Q&A portal on our YouTube live stream, and we'll work them into the discussion. We look forward to hearing from you throughout the episode. It's now my pleasure to introduce our special guest. We're joined by Michael Stoddard, Executive Director of Efficiency Maine Trust. We are also planned to have Marnese Jackson, Executive Director of the Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition, who will be joining us a little bit later. Michael, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks, Stephen. A pleasure to be here.
We've got lots to cover and only half an hour, so let's get right into it. So, Michael, first for our audience, if you could please briefly just talk a little bit about the role that your organization plays in building electrification, and kind of how that relates to your work with people in Maine.
Stephen, Efficiency Maine Trust is a quasi-state agency that was established by the legislature in Maine back in 2010. And our assignment is to administer all of the energy efficiency programs in the state. You look at a lot of other states around the country, the utilities have that job. But in a few states, and Maine is one of them, that's been assigned to a third party, and we are that third party. So the funds from the utilities come to us, and we plan and design and implement all of those energy efficiency programs. And over the years, that has expanded to include other kinds of carbon reduction strategies and programs, and that includes beneficial electrification. So we are delivering the programs to all customer classes across the whole state of Maine for beneficial electrification.
That's great, thank you. And we're going to touch on definitely some of those programs and the way that you implement them and what's worked and all of those things a lot in this discussion. So just a little bit of context for our audience. Just about a third of U.S. buildings are in cold climates. That's about 43 million homes and 400,000 commercial buildings. And in many regions of the country, there is a mix of climates. But in New England, where Michael is, that is pretty much everywhere for where it is cold or very cold climates. So Michael, what are the unique challenges that need to be overcome when you're electrifying buildings in a cold climate like Maine? And does this really differ between new builds and retrofits?
Well, the number one thing we've struggled to overcome, and I think we've made good progress, is myths that they don't work in the cold. And I think that myth originated from earlier generations of heat pump technology, which had a lower temperature boundary of maybe 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And so 20 years ago, you didn't get heat pumps for heating, you got them for cooling. And if you lived in a place where you needed heating, you knew that you weren't going to be able to use them when the temperature got below 20. And that was most of the winter. So a lot of people just turned them off for the winter, and that's what the old furnace and boiler technicians would advise customers to do. Unfortunately, in the early days of us starting to promote heat pumps, this newest generation of cold climate heat pumps, a lot of those boiler and furnace technicians continue to tell their customers, hey, you don't use this for the winter. You just use this for the fall and the springtime. It turns out, in fact, that these are now designed to function for the entire winter, and you will save the most money and the most carbon if you run them for the entire winter. So the hardest thing for us has been overcoming that myth and demonstrating to people that this new generation does work very well all winter long.
That is great. And when we talk about cold climate heat pumps, sometimes in the space, we're talking about they're referred to in a very specific way. Can you talk a little bit about like what those specifications are that kind of make that different from a heat pump in an air source heat pump in say Florida or California?
Well, I think you could buy these anywhere, but if you're in a state like Maine, where these programs have been promoting the highest performing heat pumps for cold temperatures, the distributors and the contractors are likely to have them in stock, which is helpful. These are particularly designed for cold climates. Different brands have different spec levels, but these will deliver 100% of nameplate capacity at negative 13 degrees Fahrenheit, most of the ones that we're promoting. They'll still give you 80% of capacity at negative 22 degrees Fahrenheit, and they'll still be making some heat at negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. So I would acknowledge we're not experiencing the super cold temperatures you might get in parts of Alaska or up in more remote reaches of Canada. But where we are, it just does not get below negative 22 degrees Fahrenheit for very long. If it does, it's a few hours in the middle of the night. And so you're still going to have enough heat in your home to get through. So we are finding that these new generation of heat pumps will give you terrific heating performance. We did an evaluation last year of a bunch of heat pumps that had been installed across the state. There was one day it was negative 16 degrees, and at the head of the indoor unit of the heat pump, it was still pushing out 90-degree air. So don't tell me they don't work in the cold. We have about 150,000 customers that will testify they do.
That's amazing. That's really great to hear. That actually leads me to another question I wanted to talk to you about a little bit. So your state had initially set a target to install 100,000 heat pumps by 2025, and you actually met it 2 years early, which led to adding another goal of an additional 175,000 by 2027. And your agency was deeply involved in meeting this goal. So can you talk a little bit about what drove this success?
Sure. I think the number one thing that drove it was word of mouth. As I just finished saying, the earlier adopters of this technology were thrilled by the performance. I think they didn't really expect it to perform as well as it has, and it's been fantastic. This is a state that is primarily heated with delivered fuels, not natural gas, mostly heating oil and kerosene and propane. Those tend to be a little bit more expensive. And so you have a marketplace of consumers that is very sensitive to energy prices because we have a long, cold winter. We know we're going to have to do a lot of heating, and we're stuck using these fuels that are quite expensive. So the consumers in Maine are very motivated to look for alternatives that will help save them money. So when this new technology came along and it worked well and it saved them money, oh, and by the way, it gave them air conditioning that they didn't used to have, and now our summers are getting hotter, and they kind of like that too. it just took off like wildfire. So I think very motivated and savvy customers is one important piece. We did everything we could do at our organization to help nudge that along. We have a terrific website at efficiencymaine.com, which I would encourage people to go check out. Lots of online tools like calculator tools to calculate what your cost savings will be if you switch from one fuel to another or from one heating system to another. A searchable database of all the contractors in Maine who install heat pumps and how to reach them and how to get to their website. So that has fostered a lot of competition in this marketplace, which has been critical because these guys are competing against each other on price. And so that means the Maine consumer is able to get heat pumps installed at a very reasonable price. And we now have more than 550 contractors that have registered that indicate they will install heat pumps and they know how to do it, and they've been through training classes with us. And so that has been critical to keeping this new product attractive to consumers. I would say those are among the most important features of what made it successful.
Yeah, that contractor point that you made is really, really important because those are the people that are making these installations that are often helping the homeowners make these decisions, and so that's incredibly important. So that's really great to hear. I want to go back to a point that you made about most homes are heated by delivered fuels. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what that means for transitioning kind of in a physical sense? So, a lot of places in the U.S. are using central air source heat pumps to replace like a gas boiler, but that's the situation in Maine is generally quite different. So can you talk a little bit about what that looks like, kind of what you're coming from and what you're going to?
Yeah, it affects us in a couple of ways. One is, what is the change in fuels and how does that impact the customer? What do they have to deal with? What does the contractor have to deal with when they're switching from one to the other? And the other, it goes to the issue of how the heat is distributed through the building, whether it's a house or a school or an office building or whatever it is. And as you are hinting at, in most of the northeastern states, and certainly in the northern New England states, most homes are heated with hydronic heating systems. So the heat is delivered through the home by pushing hot water or steam through pipes that go to radiators that are distributed around the building. That's a lot different than a furnace system that is blowing hot air through duct work. And since the majority of homes in our state use hydronic distribution systems and not ducted furnace systems, we don't have existing furnace duct work to retrofit into. So we needed something else because it would have been cost prohibitive for a lot of these homes to tap into to put in all new duct work. And right now, the versions of heat pumps that are available in the U.S. don't quite make they don't make heat hot enough to deal with a steam distribution system or even a hot water system. There are new models coming in from Europe that appear like they may be able to do that. So we might be able to retrofit in the future into hydronic distribution systems. But for right now, the solution that's been working great in Maine and other states like Vermont, I know, and Western Massachusetts is mini split ductless heat pumps. So you place them strategically around the building, an outdoor compressor and then an indoor head with a fan on it to blow it around. And so in a smaller home, you could probably heat the entire home with 2 or maybe 3 of these if they're strategically located. But that has been a pretty significant shift in both for customers and contractors to figure out, how do I move to this distributed system of heating instead of the central system of heating where I just feed into a distribution system. So it has its pros and cons, but one thing is it's very easy to install. You don't have to deal with piping. I mean, you do have some piping, but it's not as tricky to deal with as the traditional plumbing. So it's made it pretty low cost for people to retrofit. It's always easier and better and cheaper if you're doing it in new construction. And we are finding that 1 in every 5 new buildings built in Maine, residential buildings, is going entirely to heat pumps, no fossil system at all. So that's great on the new construction, and I expect that number to grow even further. And we're now starting to see that in multifamily buildings. So a lot of the affordable housing in Maine that's being built at a rapid clip is going all electric, heat pumps only. And we have made a decision in our state to use as much of the IRA rebate funds as possible to help facilitate that new construction and making it all electric using heat pumps. But even on the retrofit side, it's still, these mini split ductless heat pumps are proving to be very effective way to work around the hydronic distribution systems we have here.
That's great. Thank you. You mentioned the IRA rebates, so I want to talk a little bit about rebates for a minute. We've seen a lot of federal funding coming in for electrification and decarbonization, including those sorts of rebates, funding through the Weatherization Assistance Program, and recently about $20 billion in funding to financial institutions, much of which will likely end up going to buildings. What have been the successes and challenges in accessing and implementing the funding from the federal government in Maine, and what is missing?
Well, I think we've been quite fortunate in Maine because of the conversation you and I have been having about how motivated we were as a state to pursue this new technology. We didn't just start heat pump programs in the last few years. We started these in 2012. So we've been doing heat pump programs for more than a decade now. And I think we learned lessons along the way, and we were able to build up a marketplace of the supply chain and the contractors and a very knowledgeable consumer group to really start to scale this up. So for the last 3 or 4 years, we've been scaling up at a pretty remarkable level, so much so that we're starting to get national attention. And I think the federal government recognized that. And so when we showed up to put in applications for some of these federal funds, they've been very responsive. So we've been fortunate to win some grants. We're doing a large program for manufactured and mobile homes, which we're going to be converting to heat pumps, entirely to heat pumps. And we've used a significant amount of our funds from the American Rescue Plan Act, all for heat pumps, both for low-income consumers and for schools and municipalities. But I think if you want to, and we intend to use a lot of that greenhouse gas reduction fund financing for supporting these conversions over to heat pump systems. So we have very generous rebates that we continue to offer, but we're going to be able to supplement that with financing for the balance of the project cost. So we're extremely excited about that. We're getting terrific results from low income and moderate income households. So we're checking a lot of important boxes regarding equity, both income equity and geographic equity. From the greatest concentration of rebates from our programs is going to the northernmost, most remote part of our state. I think a lot of people assumed it would be in the southern part. That has not been our experience. We've had terrific results in the entire state. So it's both geographically and from an income standpoint, very equitable program. But I think the thing that's missing is if people think that these federal dollars are going to get the whole job done. So while they are tremendously generous and they are going to really help us jumpstart some new initiatives, I think in our state, it's going to be enough money to last us probably 2 or 3 years, maybe 4. What we're fortunate is that we've built this foundation of support, bipartisan support in the legislature and in our governor's house to continue and sustain these programs. And the importance, so we found other funds, state-based funds, to support this, both from our electric utilities and from a program that Maine participates in called the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. So that's the Northeast's cap and trade system for carbon. So all the revenues we've been able to get our fingers on, we've put towards this goal. And that has sent a terrifically important signal to the marketplace, including contractors and entrepreneurs, small business people, to say, hey, I think I can sustain a business. I can grow a business here. I can hire people. If I need to buy a new van or a new truck, I know this program is going to be here 3 years from now, 5 years from now. And that encourages people to invest in this sector, and that brings in more competition, keeps the prices down, and more affordable for consumers. So I think our attention to sustained funding for these rebate programs we've been running for a decade now has been critical. And that has been tremendously benefited by the bipartisan support in our state at the legislature and in the governor's mansion for these programs.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So it sounds like the federal funding is useful and helpful, but not foundational. Like there's a lot that has been built up in your state, and looking through the way the rebates that you have at the state level and the way they're designed and the programs that you have going on are really really impressive, and like clearly take a lot of equity into account and things like that, which we love to see here at Atlas. So we've been talking a lot about heat pumps. I also wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the other electrification and decarbonization kind of elements for buildings in Maine. So, and of course, they all kind of weave together and tie together. So I wanted to ask, clearly buildings in a cold climate like Maine are necessarily going to have different heating and cooling needs than those in warmer climates. So when you're looking to electrify in a state like Maine, how important is weatherization and insulation to that process?
Great question. And I think our organization has a slightly unconventional view of the answer to that question. We find weatherization to be extremely valuable. It is great to weatherize your home, especially if it's in crummy shape. And we have homes in this state that are over 100 years old, many that are over 50 years old. And the building practices from those eras and the materials that they had available are just not as good as what we have available today. So there is lots of room for improvement in those homes. And if that is a project that people can take on, we strongly encourage it. So we have an entire area of programs and rebates just to support doing more of that. And we strongly encourage it. However, we do not require that you do weatherization as a prerequisite to switching to electrification. Moreover, we don't even really want people to concern themselves with whether there's more requirements or prerequisites. One of the things that has made our program successful, we believe, is that we've kept it simple, really simple. And the reality is that if you start layering on more and more requirements for what they got to do, you're going to turn off the customers and you're going to turn off the contractors. You're going to make the projects much more expensive, and it's going to result in paralysis of the customer. So, energy efficiency has never been the most exciting thing. We've known that for a long time. It's hard to get the customers to decide that they would rather spend their money on this than nice shiny granite countertops or a nice fun vacation somewhere warm. This is not an easy sell, and you got to make it easy and you got to make it attractive. And so when you start layering on prerequisites, you undercut that simplicity. Moreover, heat pumps they're this incredible technology. I mean, with the inverters and their ability, they have a very high turn down ratio. So like a really good, sophisticated bike with many, many gears. They can ramp up and ramp down very efficiently. Unlike the way our old traditional furnaces and boilers, they sort of roar to life there. It's just one speed, man. It's pinned all the way to the top or all the way off. And heat pumps aren't like that. So some of the risks associated with oversizing a system with an old traditional system are not as pronounced with heat pumps. And more importantly, if you switch your entire, a typical weatherization project in Maine is going to cost you somewhere between $7,000 and $17,000, quite a bit of money. You're probably going to save between 15 and 25% on your energy use, which means you're probably going to save 15 to 25% of your carbon emissions. For the same price, you could switch to heat pump system and save 60% of your carbon emissions. It turns out that most contractors specialize. The ones who are good, the ones who are fast, the ones who are lowest cost, they specialize. They're expert in one thing or another. The folks that install heat pumps have refrigeration licenses and they have electrician licenses. They do not have a truck with a spray gun that can blow insulation into your house. And vice versa. The guys that do the weatherization may or may not have heat pump capabilities. So what you're talking to the customers, now you got to get two contractors. You got to schedule two different groups of folks. You got to get two different sets of quotes. And for a lot of people, that's just too much. So we've said, it's your call. Do it at your own pace. Heat pumps will work fine, even in a poorly insulated home. They're not going to work any worse. The determining factor is how cold it is outside. That's the principal issue. And that's not going to change whether you weatherize your home or not. So we strongly encourage people to do it, but we don't require them to do it.
It sounds like flexibility. We're touching on a couple of answers to a couple of questions too here right now, where flexibility is also and ease of access is also something that has been useful in increasing adoption of these technologies, and in addition to just the fact that you have access to these programs separately, it's also making them easy and not making each individual program too complicated.
There's lots of things you can do to cross market and encourage. So there's lots of things you can do through education that will help people do all the best things they can do for their home. But I think especially in states that are thinking of just starting out in the early days of this, you really want to keep it simple. And then maybe when you get further along, you can start to weave in more complexity.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, we're getting pretty close to time, so I want to give you my kind of lightning round question.
Yeah.
Which is, if you had to summarize your outlook for building electrification in Maine in the next few years in one word, what would it be?
Smartphones.
Oh.
20 years ago, we didn't have smartphones, did we? Never even heard of the thing, right? I mean, cell phones were cool. They flipped open. You had to tap all the buttons and stuff. There was no scrolling screen, none of that. That's where we're going with heat pumps. It's going to be like smartphones. More than 90% of all the heating we do in all the cold weather states is going to be from heat pumps in the next 10 to 20 years. And we're on our way. So I think we're sort of at the early adopter, or maybe on our way to the early majority stage. And I think 10 or 20 years from now, we'll be looking at 90% of our heating at the commercial and residential level will be from heat pumps. So it's going to be an exciting ride.
That sounds wonderful to me. Well, Michael, thank you so much for joining. It's been such a pleasure talking with you and helping our audience kind of understand more about what's been going on in Maine, because there's a lot of great stuff you've been talking about.
It was a pleasure to be with you today, Stephen. Thanks for inviting me.
Great. Well, and thank you to the audience for watching. This has been Buildings Hub Live. We are so glad that you were able to come join us today. Please you can see a recording of this wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, on YouTube. You can watch this and any of our past Building Hub Live episodes on atlasbuildingshub.com. And you can also, check out our dashboards, look at all of our great data, register to become part of the community. And so again, thank you very much for joining. We will see you next time.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Buildings Hub Live. You can listen to this episode and all other installments in our podcast on the Atlas YouTube channel, as well as on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. If you're interested in additional content, check out our data, articles, and dashboards on Buildings Hub at atlasbuildingshub.com. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you again soon.